Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I hope you're having an amazing day, because if you're having an amazing day, I'm having an amazing day. If I'm having an amazing day, you should be having a fucking fabulous day. Right, let's get down to it. Right, see, here I am, as usual, as per my Thursday routine, smack in the middle of the Malaysian rainforest, doing manly things, hiking around the forest like a manly man, because I'm not a little beta bitch boy, yeah, sipping latte at some soy boy cafe, huh? I'm not some beta bitch boy, I'm an alpha lobster on the dominance hierarchy. So naturally I need to do alpha things, because only a monster is considered a real man. You got to be a monster to be a real man, right? So here I am doing monstrous beastly things in the jungle. Okay, let's continue. Right. Okay. Yeah, what was I going to talk about today? So many things on my mind, but today I would like to talk to you about colored faces in high places. Okay, this is a response to Captain Cool's video. Shout out to Captain Cool. He made a really great community posting, about internalized colonialism. Go check out Captain Cool's YouTube channel. It's a really great channel that not only serves the Asian diaspora's interests, but also the interests of all the downtrodden and oppressed people of the world. Captain Cool is an intersectionalist in the sense, not in the sense that he's an ID poll kind of guy, but he's an intersectionalist in the sense that, he believes in the emancipation, liberation, and of all downtrodden people in the world, even working poor, no matter of what race they are. So go support Captain Cool's channel, please. Yeah, he's a great guy, really nice guy, and I'm really privileged to have come across his channel. I'd like to add my 2 cents to Captain Cool's video, about internalized colonialism, in which Captain Cool mentions that one of his former co-workers was a guy from Hong Kong, basically, who was so mentally colonized that he was really nasty to the other colored migrant co-workers, but he was really subservient, obsequious with the white man, right? So that's going to be the topic of today's video. So there's this half-baked liberal idea that if you simply had more colored representation, like for example, more blacks in positions of power in America, or more Asians in academia, for example. Well, Asians do have, they do tend to dominate academia in America. But let's just say this idea, this half-baked liberal idea that, with more colored representation, there will be more progress for people of color, right? This idea that basically stems from this tribalistic idea that people of color naturally look out for each other. So by that logic, if you are a person of color, you would want to advance, rather, the cause of people of color, POC emancipation, anti-imperialism. You can do that by putting more people of power into positions of authority. But as we have seen with Barack Obama's disastrous track record in the Middle East, with Andrew Yang simping for imperialist Israel, the fact of the matter is that no, people of color in high places do not necessarily translate to more social progress, right? And white people in positions of power does not necessarily mean regression either. Of course, I'm in favor of the dynamics of the world to shift into being a more multipolar, less Western-dominated world. I want the world to not be Western-dominated anymore. But at the same time, I think we should exercise caution in assuming that Asian or Middle Eastern or African people, whatever, in positions of power will necessarily institute social progress, right? Because, first of all, people of color are not unilateral. What I mean by that is that people of color have tribalistic motivations among themselves, right? Like, no one in their right mind would deny the fact that there is ethnic tension in Malaysia among the Chinese, the Malays, and the Indians, which I would rather not contribute to, which is why I try to stay away from identity politics and focus on class issues. But the fact of the matter is that even people of color are not united, right? Tribalism, tensions exist between people of color. So between each individual group, there are going to be tensions due to differences in culture, religion, and politics, right? So, yeah. And second of all, this is the second most important point. When white liberals say, listen to people of color, their experiences are valid. Let's assume that these white liberals are coming from a good place, right? Let's assume that they're coming from a good faith place. They're not trying to bullshit, right? Right. Which people of color do you listen to, right? Do you listen to someone like FD Signifier or Candace Owens? Do you listen to someone like Malcolm X or Thomas Sowell? Which person of color has the correct and the objectively correct experience? Which person of color can tell you the objectively true experience of a person of color, right? You listen to Malcolm X, you listen to Thomas Sowell, they will seem as different as night and day, their experiences, right? As different as night and day. Malcolm X, of course, would give you a very, very negative account of American imperialism and, of course, the experience of the black man in America, as probably would FD Signifier. But you listen to Thomas Sowell, you get a very different account, right? So not all people of color view the world equally, first of all, right? Those who benefit from Western imperialism, especially the Asian bourgeois, such as the sultans of Malaya, in the past it was known as Malaya, the rich Chinese businessmen who sold opium to their own Chinese people, they would not tell you that imperialism was a bad thing, right? They did not consider the interests of the masses of Asia to be more important than filling their own coffers with profits, right? So it's fundamentally untrue to assume that all people of color have got a monolithic experience, because people of color, first of all, are not a monolith. We are individuals with different cultures, different religions, different aspirations, and even among racial groups, like Chinese, for example, there are vast differences between us, right? No one in their right mind, for example, would say that there's any similarity in temperament between myself and someone like Joshua Wong, right? Right? So here's the thing. I'm not convinced that putting more people in positions of power is going to necessarily advance the cause of people of power, simply because people of color are also human beings, and they too are subject to the same kinds of faults and weaknesses that any other race is subject to. And it is quite naive to assume that people of color, would be acting necessarily in the interests of people of color. right? Rather than their own individual interests, right? The thing is, that's why I've always considered it a little bit cringe for some Malaysians who say that, oh, we must have a Chinese prime minister, we must have an Indian prime minister. You know, what, why does his race have any bearing on his performance, right? Would you rather have a Chinese prime minister like Jolo, or would you rather have a Malay prime minister who's actually competent, does his job properly? It's just the same as saying, the Americans who voted for Hillary Clinton, because of their stupid tribalistic identity politics, not caring, of course, that Hillary Clinton is a disciple of Henry Kissinger. She's a warmonger and an imperialist and a hardcore rabbit capitalist. American liberals, in fact, I don't like liberals. The American left, despite the fact that Clinton is hardly someone you would call on the left, unless by left you mean someone like Marine Le Pen, wanted a female president so badly that they were willing to throw the working class, the masses, and the people of countries that have been, that are facing American imperialism under the bus just to fit their stupid identity politics, just to fulfill their stupid identity quotas. The famous African American revolutionary Malcolm X talked about the two types of slaves during the days of slavery. He talked about the field Negro and the house Negro, right? The field Negro was treated very, very poorly. He was the one who was like working from dusk to dawn, who ate crap food that was not fit for dogs. And basically, he's the one who did all the dirty work, right? All the work that, that basically made America rich without having to pay for it. Yeah, that's the thing. While the house Negro, on the other hand, was the slave that the master liked better than the field Negro, right? Perhaps he was more submissive, or perhaps she would be, was the one doing sexual favors for the white master. So the house Negro would stay in the house. The house Negro would eat the master's food, would sleep in the bed, and basically do domestic chores, like taking care of the household like an unpaid servant. Now, the thing is, this sort of dynamic is typical Westoid divide and conquer, right? It's meant to divide the slaves among themselves by pretending to favor one type of slave over the other. So that, so when the field Negro talked about killing the master and freeing the slaves off the plantation, the very first person to report it to the master would be the house Negro. Because the house Negro, more often than not, ended up loving his master more than himself. The house Negro, more often than not, ended up, being more loyal to the master than to his own community, right, of slaves. When the master, in fact, the house Negro enjoyed a certain power trip, a certain sense of power tripping resulting from Stockholm Syndrome over the field slaves, in the same way some of these boba libs and boba cucks enjoy a sense of power tripping by calling outspoken Asian men MR Asians, right? While not calling outspoken white men MR Aryans. So, the house Negro, when the master needed a slave to be whipped, more often than not, the master would not need to bother raising the whip himself. Mr. Sowell would say, "Hey, Thomas, go whip them slaves for me." And Thomas would say, "Yes, massa." And sometimes the house Negro, like Stephen in Django Unchained, was so cruel, that even the white man was shocked by his cruelty, right? He went to depths that the white man would not even adventure into in oppressing the other slaves, in order to show the white man that he was not like the other slaves. In the same way, I've mentioned before, Uncle Chans and Auntie Lus, self-hating Asian people who despise the very sight of other Asian people who only have white friends and basically really, really don't like anything about being Asian. They don't like Asian people. They don't like Asian culture. These people are sometimes, believe it or not, even worse than the typical racist white man. These people hate being Asian so much that they put the white man to shame when it comes to how cruelly they treat other Asians, how despicably they behave towards other people of color. And I think I've joked before that, that Uncle Chans and Auntie Lus are really white supremacists with an Asian skin. I think I've mentioned that before, yeah. There's no difference from them, fundamentally, in their heart, from a white supremacist. Spiritually, the Uncle Chan and the Auntie Lu is a white supremacist, right? The only thing that distinguishes them from a white supremacist, from a Nazi, is their exterior Asian shell, So really, when they try to speak up on behalf of Asians, the Chan and the Lu is simply a phony representative of Asian culture, simply because he or she does not even consider himself or herself to be Asian. Take, for example, Imperial Japan, which I consider to be the macrocosm of the Uncle Chan. The Uncle Chan is the microcosm, Imperial Japan is the macrocosm. When Japan advanced scientifically before the rest of Asia, Japan had a choice, and Sun Yat-sen was hoping that the Japanese would form Pan-Asian unity with the rest of Asia and would use their power in order to empower other Asians, protect other Asians, and help other Asian countries to prosper, rather than punch down on them and oppress them, right? Unfortunately, Dr. Sun was misguided in assuming that the Japanese would have any loyalty to other people of color, right? In fighting against Western imperialism. The Japanese, after the Meiji Revolution, which by the way, also involved them, absorbing really, really fascistic tendencies from the West, such as social Darwinism and, really fascist military culture from Western countries, And why do you think they got along so well with Nazi Germany? The Meiji Revolution basically gave Japan a choice. Basically, it could finally, after winning the first Russo-Japanese War and defeating a white power. Back then, Russia was known as a white power. Only recently has it, been seen as more of an Asian power, due to the rise of communism in Russia. But back then, it was considered a civilized white European power. Right. The defeat of a white power was very, very startling to the European countries, right? Never could they possibly imagine that, that Russia would fall so easily to a bunch of what they perceive, not me, but what they perceive as a bunch of little rice-eating, slant-eyed midgets, right? Never in their wildest dreams did they think that the white man, would be defeated by the Asian man. So Japan was a very successful Asian country. But Japan, very stupidly, instead of fighting imperialism, instead of opposing the imperialist powers and forming a pan-Asian united sphere of Asian countries that would protect and help one another, what did Japan do? It tried to suck up to the imperialists because of their pathological inferiority complex, right? They decided to join up with the Western imperialists, emulate the way the Western imperialists behave towards their colonized subjects, the way the British behaved in India or the Belgians behaved in Congo. The Japanese did the same to the Koreans and the Chinese, right? Anyone they perceived to be inferior based on the social Darwinist philosophies they'd adopted from the West. And never forget, Nazism is a Western ideology. Social Darwinism is a Western ideology, despite the fact that fascists like Douglas Murray and Jordan Peterson try their best to disassociate themselves from fascism and social Darwinism. These are Western ideologies that made Japan the way it was, a very violent, militaristic society in the 19th century, with really Spartan levels of cruelty to the Chinese and the Koreans, in the same way the Spartans were cruel to the Helots, right? Japan, unfortunately, was infected by Western brain rot, and unfortunately, that's the reason why other Asian countries were not really on board with Asia for Asians when Japan said, let's make it Asia for Asians. Because for whom? For the Japanese, for the Malays, for the Indians. What about the Chinese and the Koreans? How are they going to treat the Chinese and the Koreans in this new pan-Asian social Darwinist empire? So, many Asian communities fought against the Japanese because they did not consider them to be worthy of, heading the mantle of Asian civilization, basically. You know what I mean? So, that is why, even though the Japanese were not white people, they tried really, really hard to ape the white man by adopting Western clothing, by adopting Western customs, Western cuisine, banning Japanese court dress at official functions, They tried really hard to ape the white man. They were so cruel, not just in the Second World War, but even in the First Sino-Japanese War. Like, how do you think Taiwan became a Japanese colony? They were so cruel that even white racists from America, were shocked by their cruelty, right? You can read up what American journalists say about Japanese war crimes in the First Sino-Japanese War. They were so cruel that they shocked the white man. Because at the end of the day, because they imbibed this philosophy of social Darwinism and of racial hierarchies from the West, they believed that they too must be seen as equal to the white man. And by doing that, they tried their level best to oppress and abuse other people of color even more cruelly than the white man did, right? So no, I don't necessarily believe that putting more minorities, more POCs, more gays, more women, whatever, in positions of power is going to progress society and serve the interests of these respective communities. Like, you honestly believe that if Dave Rubin became the president of America tomorrow, that there would be a significantly reduced degree of homophobia in America? Do you believe if Ridwan T became the Prime Minister of Malaysia tomorrow, do you think that there would be significantly reduced xenophobia in Southeast Asia? Absolutely not, right? So, similarly, not all people of color are our friends, right? Not all of them are our friends, and I don't think it is our job to win chance and lose over. But we must be careful, we must be very careful that if we see a Chan or a Lu, someone who is, who basically is more interested in serving imperialism and has no interest in safeguarding the interests of his or her community, it is important for us to identify that person and publicly expose that person so that we know not to associate with that person, so that our comrades do not associate with that person. Just like any potential class traitors, anyone who's going to be who's basically only calls themselves a socialist because they don't like the rich, but they don't actually like the poor either. And in fact, they would be part of the bourgeois if only the bourgeois would let them. These people ought to be identified so that we can, cut ties with them and tell others not to associate with them. It's not fascism, it's survival, right? So, yeah. And that's about it for today. Basically, yeah, because the reason why Chans and Lus are so dangerous. Let me tell you why Chans, Lus, and Toms are so dangerous. It is because white society, right, liberal white society tends to use their voice as the authentic voice of their communities. But ask yourself this. Why is it that those ID poll people in the West, white liberals, why is it they say that someone like Esther Khoo's voice or someone like Celeste Ng's voice is a valid Asian voice? But ask yourself, why not someone like Douglas Kim? Chans and Lus and Toms and Candaces are the foot soldiers of imperialism. They are the Trojan horses, right? They are the wolves in sheep's clothing. They are smiling serpents. And yeah, we shall have nothing to do with them. Okay? And I would not support anyone like them if they were to be running for politics, right? I would sooner support a white man like Cyrus Jansen or Desmond Doss over these people. Thank you. Tiada raja atau penguasa, peluru atau penjara yang dapat menghalangi kita menjadi rakyat merdeka. Selagi nyawa dalam diri perjuangan takkan henti. Biar darah membasuh bumi menyeratakan sekali perjuangan penghabisan bersatulah melawan dan internasional pastikan berjaya.